Welcome. Dr. Don Operario is a professor of public health in the Department of Behavior and Social Sciences in the School of Public Health at Brown University. He was trained as a social and health psychologist, having gotten his BA from UCLA, his both master's and PhD at UMass Amherst. He also did a postdoctoral fellowship at UC San Francisco and worked at our we call it one of our sister centers at CAPS, Center for AIDS Prevention Studies in San Francisco. Dr. Operadio's research addresses the social, psychological determinants of HIV, sexual health, and related health issues in diverse communities with an emphasis on developing and evaluating theory-based social and behavioral interventions for members of high-risk groups. And his research is also focused on the lived experiences associated with social inequality, so important in this day and age, and has always been important, but particularly at this moment in time, with an emphasis on understanding the perspectives of disadvantaged group members and addressing associated health and psychosocial disparities. And this research he does in the context of both U.S. domestic and international public health issues. So we're very pleased to have you today, Don. Thank you so much. He'll be speaking with us today on couples-focused HIV prevention for trans women and their partners. Welcome, Don. Now over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna try to share screen and hopefully this works.
Yes, we see it.
Was that successful? Okay.
We can see your notes.
Also seeing your notes. I don't know if you won't want that to be that way.
Oh, I think not.
There you go.
They're gone now?
Yes.
Yep.
Notes are gone. Okay. Okay, good, because the notes were from a talk from 3 years ago and they wouldn't be relevant to this. Well, thank you all for having me. I'm especially honored to talk to colleagues at the Columbia HIV Center because as many of you probably know, and as you will see, a lot of my work has not only been inspired by the research from your center, but it builds on and benefits from the discoveries that colleagues at the Columbia HIV Center have made. And I also have seen one of our alum, Ariana Pather. Hi, Ariana, out there. We have also at Brown been fortunate to welcome into our master's and PhD programs many of your RAs and your master's students trained there. So it's a wonderful reciprocal relationship that we seem to be having. Let me note that I have no conflicts of interest in this talk. Before proceeding, I want to acknowledge, as many of us have been experiencing, my own discomfort, distress, outrage, and grieving over the events over the past few months, which represent a long-standing history of anti-Black racism, police violence, and social, psychological, and physical erasure of oppressed populations in the US. Though the past few weeks, and in particular, the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor have brought these issues to the forefront of our attention. I think many of us also recognize that in addition to Black lives mattering always, that Black trans lives are also particularly at risk. In fact, just I think last month, we read about the murders of Dominique Fells and Rhea Melton, two Black trans women in Philadelphia and Ohio, respectively. Now, these events, as a public health researcher and a person who has the fortune of working in a university, remind me of my and our collective privilege and positionality. And in an optimistic framing, the ways by which we can use our skills and our tools as researchers and our context as members of university settings to be advocates and scientists on behalf of justice and equity. Let me turn to the main points that I'm trying to cover in this presentation today. I'll begin with a very brief series of snapshots describing HIV epi and relevant theory in my work with trans women. Many of these are probably things that folks at the HIV Center are well aware of. I'll describe some prior research that my colleagues and I have been doing for the past 15 years, culminating in our couples HIV intervention research that we've been engaging in over about the past 6 years. I'll close with some kind of reflections about our need for trans-inclusive research, sorry for that typo, and then open it up to questions. So to begin, some snapshots on epi and theory in our collective work with trans women and HIV. So this comes as no surprise to many of us that trans women are among the most high risk and vulnerable populations in the United States for HIV acquisition. The most recent meta-analysis that I'm aware of, done by Bikasan et al., published in AJPH a couple years ago, estimated about 14% of trans women are living with HIV. This is not equally distributed across all trans women. As you see in the slide, 44% of African American and Black trans women are estimated to be living with HIV, 26% of Hispanic and Latinx trans women, and 7% of white trans women. Global estimates show equally distressing data based on Steph Barrell and Tony Petit and colleagues' meta-analyses. They're estimating about 19% of trans women across global contexts are living with HIV, and have further estimated that this is about in 49% greater odds of HIV, 49 greater odds total of HIV infection compared with cisgender peers. Trans women across the globe are infrequently addressed in national HIV strategies, and they are also underutilizing or being underserved with regards to HIV biomedical prevention. One of the most useful theories guiding health research with LGBT populations is minority stress theory, developed by Elon Meyer, I believe when he was at Columbia many years ago, and then extended to now that he's at UCLA. This theory makes the elegant proposition that exposure, a lifetime of exposure to stigma and prejudice associated with one's stigmatized identity, contributes to potentially maladaptive psychological coping processes, which further contribute and determine HIV-related health outcomes. This theory has been well tested with LGB populations and is gaining empirical support now with trans populations. Another theoretical principle that has been shaping my work is gender affirmation theory. Now, gender affirmation as a concept refers to the interpersonal and interactive processes by which people who identify as trans receive social recognition and support for their gendered identity and expression. And I like to kind of boil this down to the concepts of trans positivity and anti-trans stigma. Jay Sebelius, a colleague of mine, has proposed a gender affirmation framework that complements Elon Meyer's minority stress theory by proposing that the sequelae of stigma include both social oppression and psychological distress, which each respectively contributes to a decreased access to gender affirmation for trans people and increased need for gender affirmation for trans people, both of which in concert may lead to exacerbated psychological and health risk. Gender affirmation can come from multiple sources, and here is a kind of a schema of the multiple levels by which gender affirmation may arise. So gender affirmation can come from structural systems that affirm, protect, legitimize, and serve trans people, inclusive physical environments, supportive social environments, as well as interpersonally, primarily, as you'll see in the slides that follow, from healthy intimate relationships, from family members, from peers, from romantic partners that affirm people's sense of who they are in the bodies by which they move through the world. I also want to lay as a foundation, I, in my work, try to continually be inspired and work based on principles of community-engaged research, which can boil down to simply working with communities and for communities rather than on communities. But to kind of distill this a little bit further, drawing from Meredith Minkler's work, the work I and my colleagues try to do hopes to engage members of the community as both allies and agents of change, both in our research and in the work that follows from the publication of our research. It's situated in communities, hoping to address topics of practical relevance to the communities with which we collaborate. It aims to be action-oriented and hopes to lead to positive social change in the communities with which we collaborate. And from the perspective of the researchers, we aspire to engage in cultural humility, critique, and reflection and personal evaluation throughout the process. So let me turn to some of the research that my colleagues and I have been doing for, gosh, about 20 years with trans women and their partners. Much of this started in the early 2000s, just as I was emerging from postdoc in collaboration with mentor and colleague Toru Nomoto, supported by a NIDA grant, which we received in about 2000. Of the many things that was accomplished during this funding period, we did a two-phase mixed methods study to try and characterize and understand the social context of HIV risk among trans women, and in particular trans women of color. And we were doing this in San Francisco with an office, a community-based office located in the Tenderloin. We started up with doing focus groups, and then building from that, we launched a community survey in San Francisco as well as the East Bay that recruited successfully upwards of 550 or so trans women of color and white trans women. That was a highly successful project. We learned a lot. We were able to develop a lot of insights into the factors that could help inform the development of interventions. A lot of the students and the colleagues I work with now who are kind of just coming into their careers now have a hard time, understandably, getting into the mindset of what life was like in the early 2000s when really there was minimal empirical understanding of the issues pertaining to HIV risk with trans women. So with Walter Bochting, colleagues at Minnesota, and some colleagues at UCLA, we were really kind of finding things out for the first time, at least in their peer-reviewed literature, which we benefit from now. Let me turn to some snapshots of some of the main findings from this series of research. Many of these findings are the things that still guide the research that we're doing today. In the focus groups we did early on, one of perhaps the most salient things that came up in our analysis was that HIV among trans women of color, well, trans women and trans women of color in particular, was not the highest priority For many of them, they described the highest priority as one in which they were seeking a context and a life where they could feel loved, trusted, and have intimate relationships with partners. And as you see in these quotes here from two different participants, one participant states, almost 99% when we were infected is because of our husbands. Because with them, none of us tried to protect. I didn't get HIV through prostitution. I was married and I got HIV from my husband. And the second quote from another participant states, I allow him to penetrate me because I love the guy. He's the only man I allow to penetrate me without the condom. Other than that, with my casual partners, I always use condoms, anal all the time, 100%. Now, this is something that is not necessarily specific to trans women, but I think it's particularly acute in trans women, given a second theme that we started to see early on, which is that a lot of trans women described having limited partner selection and choice due to what they described as a limited pool of potential romantic partners. At the time, they were referring to cisgender men. And because of this limited selection, they described having to compromise having compromises to their ability to exercise choice and volition and agency. So as this quote says, here, I wanted to have a long-term partner. I want him to like me just the way I am, even if I have this front part, which he really doesn't like, but he likes me for who I am. Participants also reflected on the potential for HIV risk for paying partners. But one of the things that's interesting, and I think we've seen this repeatedly since these data were published, is that many of them saw sex work as an occupation, and then they were therefore able to apply occupational safety rules to paying partners, to the context in which they were having sex with paying partners. So as these two quotes from two different participants say, I did not have sex with nobody without a condom, did not engage in oral sex, did not engage in anal sex, didn't do nothing without a condom, that was my rule. And then the second person follows up, you just do it for money, you close your eyes, basically, and that's why you can never be too safe. You use a condom every day. So these are kind of the rules that many of them espoused in the context of paying sex. But they also acknowledge that financial needs compromise that rule, and that the situational urgency of having to pay for rent or pay for food for the next day or for today undermines those rules. So as you see here, when the rent's due, when you're desperate, people will pay extra. You're willing to do what you have to do. Another interesting thing we saw early on, reflecting on the role of gender affirmation, is that many participants early on in our focus groups described having the experience of positive gender feedback from paying partners. So as these two quotes in front of you reveal, participant one says, I did it for the attention, sex work. I crave attention, and when I'm dressed, people just flock to you. They tell you how good you look. They buy you drinks and everything. I just ate it up. Another participant states, for a long time, I didn't care about using condoms. I think the biggest part was I needed affection. Prostitution was for me an opportunity for people to hold me and touch me in a more gentle way. So again, they have theoretical rules about using condoms in the context of safe work, sex work, but the need for gender affirmation and economic vulnerability undermine those rules. So here we see kind of this feedback loop between trans stigma and financial hardship leading to opportunities for HIV transmission. The first participant in this quote describes how she was openly discriminated against when she presented as female. The second quote describes how when coming out of dress, they were able to receive a job immediately. Now turning to some of the data from our cross-sectional community survey. Again, this was a survey using purposive sampling throughout the San Francisco area. We recruited upwards of 570 participants. 26%, as you see in front of you, identified as HIV positive. That was substantially higher among African-American trans women. What you see below that, these data here, present an interesting slope marrying onto the qualitative data, where they're reporting substantially higher condomless sex with primary partners compared to casual and paying partners. We included in this survey a measure of trans stigma, and as you recall, I conceptualized trans stigma as the inverse of gender affirmation. And in one of the papers we published off of these data, we found a really interesting interaction between trans stigma and age on condomless sex, such that younger trans women who were reporting high levels of trans stigma had a 3-fold greater odds of engaging in condomless sex compared to older trans women, as well as younger trans women who did not report high levels of trans stigma. Another paper we published off of these data indicated that trans stigma was associated with a composite index, a syndemic, as I like to think of it, of condomless anal sex, hazardous alcohol use, and drug use. Let me turn to a separate NIDA-funded grant in which we did, as part of that grant, as part of kind of the package of work we did under that grant, a community survey of the Cis-Male Partners of Trans Women. And in one of the papers, we presented data from a sample of 191 cisgender men who were currently partnered with the trans women. Again, this was all in the Bay Area. 19% of these men were HIV positive. We see here again the similar kind of slope in which they're reporting substantially higher condomless sex in the past 30 days with their primary partners and much less so with casual and paying partners. We also included in this survey a measure of stigma, but in this case we kind of adapted the items such that they reflected stigma attributed to their relationship with a trans woman, which we sometimes refer to as stigma by association. So whereas an item with in the survey with trans women would say something like, I was treated with less respect because I'm a trans woman. This item would say something to the effect that I'm treated with less respect because I'm in a relationship with a trans woman. So here we found that men who reported higher levels of trans relationship stigma had a 3-fold greater odds of condomless anal sex in the past 30 days, as well as a 2-fold greater odds of STI, diagnosed STI in the past year. What this data did for all the members of our team is affirm that male partners of trans women are themselves vulnerable to many similar stigmatizing processes that trans women are subjected to in different ways, obviously. And it helped us to really think of the relationship context in which one that needs support, affirmation, and intervention. So in 2011, 2012, I think we started with our first NIMH funded intervention to address HIV in the context of partnerships between trans women. And at first, they're cisgender male partners. And this initially was funded by NIMH and an R34. So again, this drew from a combination of minority stress and gender affirmation theories. So in this context, we saw gender affirmation as a potential mechanism to disrupt the linkages between exposure to stigma, maladaptive psychological coping processes, and health behavior outcomes. This work was also informed by two relationships theories. One is dyadic stress theory, in which, according to this theory, we saw HIV risk and stigma as shared threats to both members of the dyad. Therefore, based on this theory, we saw an opportunity to promote dyadic coping among partners as one potential strategy for reducing HIV risk for both individuals as well as for the dyad. A second theoretical framework that guided this project is self-expansion theory, which hinges on the concept of including the other in the self, which basically refers to for members of a dyad, an intimate dyad, a relationship. Aspects of one's partner become incorporated into the individual self-concepts such that they see themselves as a we, as a collective unit. And spurred by this theoretical framework, we saw opportunities to support and enhance couples' communication, support and enhance relationship goals, and shared health goals as opportunities for reducing HIV risk in this dyadic context. So the objective of what we call the Couples HIV Intervention Program, or CHIP, the R34 initial project, was to develop and then to pilot test a couples HIV prevention program for trans women and their cisgender partners. We started out by adapting Project Connect, which was developed by Nabila El-Bassel at Columbia and her colleagues, which is a highly effective HIV prevention intervention developed originally for heterosexual cisgender women and their male primary partners. We used the adapted model by Gina Wingate again. I think she's at Columbia now, isn't she? This model as a framework for undertaking steps of iterative developmental process to adapt, connect in the context of these couples. Here is what, after that process, the intervention intervention sessions looked like. So it ended up being a 3-session intervention. Project Connect was originally 5 sessions. And we heard early on that that may be challenging logistically and dyadically to bring people back for that many sessions. This was kind of a sandwich intervention in which the first session was a couples intervention in which we engaged with both partners together, discussion about HIV, basic principles of HIV and STI, strategies for prevention, HIV testing recommendations, and some basic principles of individual risk reduction strategies. We then brought partners back separately so that they could have an opportunity in private with the counselor to talk about HIV in the context of their partnership, relationship issues that they perceive as challenging in general, and particularly relevant to HIV risk factors such as trust, commitment, and monogamy. In this individual session, they had the opportunity to talk to the counselor about their own understandings about how they and their partner may or may not agree to partnerships outside of the relationship, as well as their personal experiences with stigma, both trans stigma as well as trans relationship stigma, and how that might affect them, their lives, their psychological and their sexual health. Then in a 3rd session, we brought couples back together to work with them on skills regarding partner communication, to help them identify ways by which they could support one another, and to verbally commit to and then try and develop a set of relationship goals. In this pilot study, which I should say was done from, I think, 2012 to 2013, was when recruitment and follow-up occurred. We were able to recruit 60 couples, so 120 participants total. Half were assigned to the 3-session intervention, half to a single-session HIV education discussion with both partners together. And we assessed participants at baseline and 3 months separately, so they completed these assessments on their own. Here's the schematic of the flow. As you'll see here, we did have some challenges with retention. I think this is about an 80% retention, so we lost about 20% overall. Some of that is due to kind of the mobility of participants individually as well as couples together in and out of the Bay Area, and it gets even more challenging as kind of the cost of living in the Bay Area increases, the ability for people to stay in the Bay Area decreases. Many participants also were cycling in and out of the criminal justice system, which made it also challenging to retain participants over time. Here's a snapshot of the main finding from the pilot RCT. So these are 4 separate regressions with 4 different outcome variables, and this being our primary outcome variable. Condomless anal or vaginal sex. Mutual agreement is this another outcome referring to do you and your partner agree to whether you are a monogamous or non-monogamous couple. The third outcome was whether partners had any casual extra relationship partners, and then this is the number of partners that they had outside of the relationship. And this is the test of the main effect of the intervention versus the control. And as you see here, we observed a 50% reduction in condomless anal or vaginal sex at 3-month follow-up, and this is adjusting for these covariates. We did not see a change in partners reporting mutual agreement about whether they're in a monogamous or non-monogamous partnership. Though we did see reductions in partners' reports of casual extra relationship partners and the number of partners. And when we kind of disaggregate this and unpack this a little bit more, the findings for reduction in casual partners and the number of casual partners was strong, really strong for trans women, less so for cis-male partners. So all in all, this gave us preliminary positive signals in support of the feasibility, acceptability, and the potential for this intervention to reduce risk for HIV transmission and acquisition in this dyadic composition. About 1.5 years ago, maybe closer to 2 years now, we received our R01 to do an efficacy trial building directly on the R34 chip. The primary aim of the ongoing R01 is to evaluate the efficacy of this couple's intervention on a composite HIV risk index compared to standard of care, and I'll describe the composite index in just a bit. Some secondary aims. We're also assessing intervention effects on theory-based mediators, which we didn't have the sample size to do in the pilot. The theory-based mediators that we're particularly interested in include couples communication, goal congruence, the extent to which they kind of are harmonizing around similar goals related to HIV risk and prevention, and dyadic coping. Another secondary outcome includes relationship dynamics, and here we're really interested in the extent to which the intervention can improve relationship satisfaction, a sense of commitment, and a sense of equality among members of the dyad. We're also hoping to be able to explore the moderating effects of gender and couple HIV status on intervention outcomes. So let me turn to the composite HIV risk index. So this is a couple level binary risk variable reflecting HIV, possibility of HIV transmission among members of this dyad. This is based on 3 main components. First, whether they're reporting condomless anal or vaginal sex with a serodiscordant or status unknown primary or other partner in the past 3 months. It's also based on whether we can detect protective levels of pre-exposure prophylaxis in dried blood samples, as well as whether people are reporting, it's rather than viral suppression, it should be ART adherence. So based on these 3 indicators we are going to be able to categorize whether the couple is showing either a composite risk based on these three variables for the possibility of HIV infection or not. And this is based on our science telling us that condomless anal or vaginal sex is not necessarily a risk factor in the context of PrEP adherence and in the context of PrEP protective levels and the context of ART adherence. If we were to use one variable alone, it may not tell us the full story, but by analyzing the three as a composite, it can provide what we would like to think of as a more nuanced understanding of risk for HIV transmission. And obviously we can analyze each variable on their own, but the opportunity to look at this as a composite based on both behavioral and these biomedical indicators is really exciting. So the intervention itself, as I mentioned, is called It Takes Two. If you're a child of the 80s or the 90s, you may remember these songs, It Takes Two. There's great debate in our group about whether we're following the raw bass version of It Takes Two or the seduction version of It Takes Two. I'm a proponent of seduction, and if you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, which I hope some of you do, this is Michelle Visage, by the way. So you can YouTube that later. Each of the counseling sessions following this kind of branding is a kind of itself branded by a song title. Some of these songs I don't really know because they were named by people much younger than me. So session one is called Glad You Came. It's the session to welcome people and to help allow them to feel comfortable as a couple participating in the intervention together. They're working with a facilitator to develop boundaries. We want to begin with helping them identify strengths in the relationship, things that they appreciate about each other and about their time together. And we close the relationship by setting a relationship goal and asking them as homework to amplify one positive moment between now and the next time you come, and then share that when we see each other together. I should also say all four of these sessions are couple sessions. We decided after a lot of debate to abandon, let me go back here, this individual counseling session. Some people on our team thought that this may undermine the real couples focus and the emphasis on the dyad as the level of analysis. And it may actually potentially lead to an undermining of trust among couples if they're kind of skeptical or suspicious about one person said to the other, one person said to the counselor in absence of the other partner. So these are all couples sessions. Session two is called In the Heat of the Moment. This is a song based on the group, I think, Asia from the early 80s. Awful song. In this session, as the title reflects, we are working with couples to help them think about how they communicate and communicate in times of passion or of elevated emotion. So we ask them to first discuss and describe their communication styles and preferences. We do some modeling and we have them practice what we think to be more productive communication techniques, including taking timeouts, redirecting, using I statements, etc. And at the end, as we do in all sessions, we ask them to set one relationship goal, and as homework between now and the next session, try and work together to amplify one positive moment in the relationship. Third session is called Let's Talk About Sex, Salt and Pepper and Spinderella. Here we ask the couples to talk about sexual agency and choice. We do some psycho-ed about behavioral and biomedical approaches to HIV prevention. We describe to them and ask them to select and discuss amongst themselves some personal strategies about HIV prevention that they would prefer for themselves in their relationship, and how they think they might try to negotiate that in the context of their partnership. And again, we asked them to, at the end, identify one relationship goal and to amplify one positive moment between now and the next session, which is the last session. It takes two. So in this last session, the counselor and the couples together review the sexual health goals that have been discussed through the course of the sessions. The counselor works with the couple to discuss a plan to achieve these sexual health goals, and tries to get to real specifics about how they would do that through communication, through behaviors, through planning time together, etc. They again talk about how to amplify positive moments throughout the relationship, and the counselor provides referrals. I should note that throughout the intervention, the counselor will be taking down notes, and in there the counseling folder for each couple will be able to think about what particular resources to social health, legal, housing services, etc., that they could think of that arise during the discussions with the couples. Here's the schema for the intervention itself. The intervention takes 4 weeks, so about a month to go through. The standard of care is a single session, so we're not equivalent on time and attention. Then participants complete follow-ups at 3, 6, 9, and 12, in which they complete a EFFICACY survey, and they do blood draws for assessing PrEP and ART. Here's our eligibility criteria. So as you see in front of you, we're recruiting adult trans women and their partners who've been in a relationship for 3 months. They had to have reported sex with any partner, either in or outside of the relationship, within the last 6 months. One partner has to identify as trans, and at least one partner has to identify as HIV negative. We excluded HIV seropositive, seroconcordant couples at the request of reviewers to focus on couples in which there is the likelihood of HIV transmission within the dyad. As you see by the stars, only one partner must identify as trans, and we excluded couples in which any partner reported IPV, and I'll come back to this one in a sec, but let's turn to why we're including couples in which only one partner identifies as trans. As you recall, in the R34, the partner of the trans woman had to identify as cisgender male. In the time between the R34 and now, we've learned a lot about the expansive types of partnerships that trans women may have, and the expansive types of gender identities that their partners may express. And we learned in kind of the lead up to launching the R01 in the final steps of adapting and revising and updating the intervention that many trans women are calling out the heteronormative assumptions that were explicit in the original R34. And they asked us to consider the intervention for trans women and a partner of any gender identity or gender expression in which there's a potential for HIV risk through condomless anal or vaginal sex. So we are not restricting partners to cisgender men specifically. So where are we now? Where are we now at the time too? We initiated recruitment in December. We started to recruit, and as of March, recruited 12 couples. And as we all know, by March, we were unable to proceed any further. So where we are at this moment in time is we're preparing for remote online counseling for new couples that are going to be recruited. And we're preparing for remote data collection. Remote data collection for the behavioral assessment is not that challenging, as is our consideration for collecting our biomarkers at follow-up. So that's what we were budgeting, that's what we're talking about with our project officers, and that's what we're talking about with colleagues at UCSF and University of Colorado who have suggestions about how to do remote biomarker data collection. As well as a colleague in New York, I think somebody at SUNY is giving us some feedback. I mentioned earlier that we excluded IPV, people reporting IPV from the R01. We just received a new R34 we're calling Project Safety. This complements the exclusion factor for the R01, in which we are going to recruit participants for an intervention addressing explicitly trans women who report IPV, intermittent partner violence, and HIV. We are again adapting an evidence-based intervention for IPV that was shown to be successful with cis women, and hope to launch that in August and then start recruiting for the pilot in December of next year. Let me close. Stephen, how much time do I have?
You have about 5-10 more minutes.
Okay. I want to close with some thoughts. So that's the research stuff. I want to close with some thoughts, kind of going back to the very beginning. And what's on a lot of our minds is equity and inclusion, how our work as researchers and as educators and members of the academy are doing justice to the communities that we are aspiring to serve. And I've been thinking a lot about that a lot generally, and even more so in the context of students who are really asking for us to be more inclusive with regards to trans communities in general. So I think all of us aspire to do value-driven research and see public health as a tool for equity and responsibility, as well as seeing higher education sites as engines for inclusion and liberation. And I think now is a really important moment to reflect on how we're doing that. I have returned to a letter that I found online. This is from a blog that I found on a trans advocate's website, in which the person wrote an essay called "Why I Will Not Participate in Trans Studies." And Ariana, if you're still there, I presented this in one of our classes, I think, when you were here at Brown. But let me share an excerpt of this with you, because if you don't remember the data, maybe this will help us to kind of remember, what we're trying to do and how we may be received by our community. So Anne writes in this essay, "Dear Mr. and Ms. grad student, I'm sorry to report that I'm not going to participate in your study as a data point. I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. I don't trust you. I don't like you. I don't care if you succeed. In fact, I kind of think you suck. What do you think you're going to do for me, for us, for trans women? Let me tell you something. Trans women have already been studied. We've been interviewed, sampled, tested, cross-referenced, experimented upon, medicated, shocked, examined, and dissected post-mortem. But you've never listened to our voices, and you need to do that now. So what do people like me need? Not counseling, not new labels on condoms, not more doctoral candidates palpating our business. Trans women need more or less in order decriminalization, housing, education, and employment. As in, not being swept off the street, not being banned from shelters, yes, being allowed in GED classes, and, well, employment. Can you provide these? What trans people need is to get through the day without being inspected. We need data, ideas, plans, and strategies, but we need to see them coming from people like us, people who don't right now seem to make it into your little position of power. We don't need your study, we don't need your thesis, and we really don't need you to graduate and do good work. And you don't need us either. You're pretty much guaranteed a good life with or without my participation in your little project, so please stuff it up your ass. I say this with all the will, with all the deference the circumstances warrant, with love, Anne. And I know, I don't think they were writing to me, but they might as well have been writing to me. And I take it as if they were writing to me, and I try to reflect on this as much as possible as if they were. So last year with one of our PhD students and one of your alum, RJ Restart, who just finished her PhD 2 months ago, we published in The Lancet a framework for including trans women in science, medicine, and global health. And you can Google this. I'll just flash this here in front of you. But I should note that 4 of these refer to things that we could do in our programs to enact change in support of trans researchers. So one is recruiting trans researchers and students into our programs, having explicit non-discrimination policies in our centers and our departments with evaluation behind it. Identifying funding mechanisms and scholarship opportunities, and being explicit with regards to mentorship of trans scholars, students, and colleagues. So I will close on that and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Operario. That was really fantastic, comprehensive, and innovative, creative, and inspiring, I'd say. So we're going to have some Q&A now, and that will be facilitated by my colleague, Stephen Sukumaran. And then, as I said earlier, we'll close our session today after the Q&A with our presentation of our early stage investigator manuscript award. So I'll leave it to you now, Stephen, to facilitate the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And thank you, Don, for a great presentation. I really appreciated those throwbacks to our 80s hits. And I also want to echo your sentiments on the, informal brown connection we have. Ariana has been invaluable to our ending the HIV epidemic supplements and a personal lifesaver. So just wanted to mention that as well. So a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, please enter your name and or your question in the chat so we can get started.
And people can actually, if they want, take themselves off mute and ask.
Teo?
Hi, Don. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the letter that you shared. You presented the letter very almost without emotion. And I was wondering whether the first time you read that letter, whether you felt that way, or whether you felt like, well, oh my God, I'm doing my best, and now I see this letter.
Good question. Yeah, I was less emotional now. I've been reading this letter for, I think I found it about 5 years ago, maybe more than that. And I think, I mean, I'm human, so my first reaction is a little bit of worry that they are singling me out, and appropriate self-consciousness, and thinking about, am I the person that they're talking to? And again, because I'm human, a little bit of defensiveness about, but I'm trying. And we're all trying together. With some distance, I think I have to reflect on the participants' point of view. And if they were in San Francisco, I'm not sure if they are, or in one of the sites where there's just a high volume of research, not only from people doing kind of, NIH-funded studies, but from now the numbers of students doing a dozen theses a year, how exhausting this must be to participants. So I try to remember that. That helps me to discuss with students when they're going about thinking, designing their studies, the burden that they're putting on participants, on a community that has been 20 years after we all started this work together. A population that has been studied a lot and has seen some, but not as much intervention and services as they need and they deserve. But to that point, one thing I do in my methods class, I teach a methods class and in LGBT health classes. I present this essay to the to students in the class, and one of the assignments is to write a response to Anne, and try and talk to Anne from the perspective of a researcher about how they can work together.
That's a very interesting exercise, Don. I appreciate that. And at the same time, reading this letter, this letter could have been written by a gay man protesting against straight people doing research on gay men and not even having a clue what they are talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. I thought it was instructive letter. Thanks.
Don, it's Walter. Maybe I can just follow up. Great to see you, and thanks for this talk. What I was also thinking, in addition to the things that have been acknowledged about this letter, is that some of it, what's lacking now, is more of a national strategy, I think, towards transgender health research. As you said, there are so many students now, which is wonderful. They're all interested in doing this work, but there's a lot of duplication. So I think we used to have consultations with CDC and a number of national coming together of community and investigators to really determine where we should go next and who's going to do what. And so I think that's something that I feel is still important and lacking, that it's very fragmented and we don't have a clear strategy, even though we have huge challenges to address, and there's huge progress that we need to make. And I do think along those lines that, you know, we have contributed. I do think that science has contributed to some of the progress that has been made so far, and we also should learn to communicate that and re-engage, I would say, the community in research and partnerships to take it to the next level. But I think we're not even clear. There's not a lot of consensus of what that next step ought to be.
Thank you, Walter. I completely agree. At one point, I thought there was going to be the development of a national strategy by a group out of DC. I think something about that fell through, but that is still very much warranted. And I also agree completely that it's our responsibility collectively and individually to find ways to disseminate and communicate with our communities why we're doing what we're doing in advance and what we did and how we could now try and use the data, use science to serve the communities after the fact. And you know, I agree wholeheartedly.
Right.
Ariana has a question. Ariana, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like.
Because it's a little bit loud in my apartment. But Don, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for your research. I was just had a question, if you could speak to the adaptability of your program in other settings. You spoke a little, I know you do global health research, and you spoke a little bit about the global burden of HIV on the trans population. So if you could talk about how your program might be adaptable to other settings.
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I have to admit I'm not quite there yet. We're thinking about it. We were trying to be intentional, very intentional, with the newest R01 to construct the counseling protocol in a way that people without PhDs and master's degrees can provide it. So it is. The staff on the project, the counselors, are trained community members who are very vocal about what will work, what will not work in a community-based setting. They themselves actually asked us to increase the number of sessions to what's now 4 sessions, which they think is something that's feasible in at least in community-based settings in the Bay Area. I'm not sure if it will be feasible outside the Bay Area. We just submitted a grant to explore engaging trans women in coastal Kenya in related work. We're trying to develop a trans-affirming HIV prevention program for Kenyan trans women in Mombasa, Kilifi, and Malindi. So we'll see how that goes. That's under review, so you know, who knows. But I agree. I think many of the assumptions, not just about the pragmatics of how many sessions and the space and the counselor, those have to be considered in global context, but also, you know, concepts of love and what a relationship means and what it means to, you know, even just words of love and emotion and communication and stigma. I mean, they are shaped and bounded by the contexts and the histories and the political economies of space. So long-winded way of answering your question. I don't think this is going to be that relevant at this point, and we have to do more to understand how to make things relevant. In particular, by just unpacking some basic concepts.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's still really important to have people, if you think of the role of the researcher, have people focus on Africa and minority communities in Africa where they don't really have the same rights as in the US.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Ariana.
We have a question and a few comments from Nadia. Nadia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, I'm on my laptop and phone, so I'm not sure which one is recording this on. But thank you so much, Don. And I'm also a Brown alum, so I love it when people from Brown come to speak. And I just wanted to make 2 comments and ask a question. The first comment is I really love the way you thought about condomless sex and that you're thinking about it in the context of both PrEP and ART adherence, and also that it's partner specific. So, you know, I do a lot of research in heterosexual couples, and it's always like, you know, you see a lot of these things where people will talk about condomless sex in the kind of in the absence of the partner, or they'll average it across the partner. And so I really wanted to applaud the very careful work that you did to think to situate the behavior in the context of a relationship, but also being very specific about thinking about, you know, condomless sex is actually perfectly, you know, it's fine, it's great if you're using, you know, PrEP and or you're on ART. So I just wanted to comment on that. And then I also want to just really thank you for sharing that letter at the end. I thought it was really powerful. And you know, the fellows, you've been talking a lot about how, you know, in the context of Black Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter, how we can make our research more inclusive, but also really, you know, meet the needs of the people we're trying to serve, and not just kind of parachuting in as researchers and you know, we don't want it to be like a parasitic relationship. And so I really appreciate that letter, and I also appreciated the resources that you posted afterwards. I wanted to say thank you for ending on that note. And then my third question actually had to do with the number of sessions that you had. So I, many years ago, I worked with Audrey Pettifor, and we adapted Project Connect for couples-based counseling in Johannesburg. And we ran into a lot of the same problems that you did, where they, you know, I think the normal program, I think it was like 8 sessions or something, and I think we shortened it to 6, which we had a really difficult time scheduling people. And yet at the end, they were like, we loved it, we wish there were more. So that was like one, you know, there was that tension there. And I'm wondering now, you know, with like all the advancements we've made in telemedicine, like in light of COVID, I'm wondering actually if there's an opportunity there to, because I'm just curious, like 3 sessions doesn't feel like very much, like you're just kind of, it seems like it would be difficult to really get into some of the more complex issues. And so I'm wondering if you see an opportunity in the future to kind of harness some of this new expertise we have in telemedicine to to provide, more extensive counseling sessions?
Yeah, that's a great point, Nadia. And that's both kind of the burden and the reality and the opportunity of what's going on right now. I mean, we're just now emerging from kind of the COVID shock and the COVID fog, and seeing the necessary adaptation of all of the protocols to go online as probably something that the field needs. Some of my colleagues, so David Ullum, who is our trained therapist, who is training our staff counselors, is understandably cautious about kind of the clinical rapport that may be undermined when we talk this way. And actually, I don't even see anyone's faces anymore, so I don't know who's out there. But it's an opportunity, and it's probably a reality. So now that we're kind of getting over the fact that we have to move online, we're trying to embrace that we can now understand how online couples interventions can be a real kind of boost to reach and coverage. So to that point, we're also adapting our assessments to ask participants to reflect on the modality of the intervention, both in the quant evaluation as well as our open-ended, what will be our open-ended exit interviews. And I think that's going to be very, very instructive. Thanks, Nadia.
Thanks, Don and Nadia. We have 2 questions, and these may be our last, from Jason. Jason asks, I might have missed this in the presentation, but what percentage of trans women self-identified as Black or Latina? Additionally, if most participants were Black and Latina trans women, were their therapists also Black or Latino? A common critique about counseling for Black, Indigenous people of color is the racism and whiteness of mental health providers.
Great point, thank you. In the original trans surveys, so before the intervention, we intentionally stratified the sample so that a quarter of our very first study, a quarter of the sample was identified as African American, a quarter identified as Latinx or non-Hispanic white, a quarter as Asian Pacific Islander, and a quarter as white. Currently, in both the most recent pilot study of the couples intervention as well as the current study, I would say probably half to maybe 2/3 of the sample identify as trans women of color. And all of the staff right now are either Black trans women or a bilingual Spanish Latinx trans women. But that doesn't absolve us from having to interrogate ourselves about implicit anti-Black language or race-based assumptions. I think that goes without saying. Well, it must be said, whether or not we identify, we still have to examine the process. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Don. Perhaps time for one more quick question if there is one. Otherwise, I will hand it back to Bob.
I mean, maybe one comment. I just think it's great, Don, that you're pursuing love, studying love, relationships, intimacy, because I think it's just such a driving force and potential such a positive one. So that's always refreshing to hear that.
Thank you, Walter. Yes, love, families of choice. Yes. And this is Pride Month, so all the more reason to reflect on these.
think that's a wonderful note to end on. Don, I want to express my personal gratitude for a really inspiring, interesting talk and discussion. Also, a quick response to one of your queries during your talk. Yes, Gina Wingood is here at Columbia, but she's also a co-director of our HIV Center here, along with Claude Mellons. So she's very present in our sphere.
Nice.
Yeah, again, great talk. So I'll simply repeat what I said earlier about our annual tradition here in our Division of Gender, Sexuality, and Health here at New York State Psychiatric Institute, Columbia University Medical Center. It's this time of year that we announce and then present our Early Stage Investigator Manuscript Award. And so to do that, I will turn it over to Dr. Anka Earhart, who is the director of our Division of Gender, Sexuality, and Health. So over to you, Anka.
First of all, let me say, Don, it was really a great talk and very much in line. And I just wanted to add how important it was that the Supreme Court just ruled that transgender people would not be off the health care benefits. And so it's a great time for that. But let me get to our main last event of this rounds today, and that is the publication award, which we have done for many years, and we always look forward to that. So this time we had a record number of 11 submissions for the HIV Center Publication Award, and they were reviewed by this year's award committee consisting of Drs. Dustin Duncan, Catherine Myers, Heino Meyer-Barburg, and chaired by Stephen Sukumaran. There was extensive deliberations because, as I said, there were 11 submissions. And the committee commented that it described for the one which was chosen, sophisticated formative research, had a thoroughly focused literature review, contained a highly sophisticated review of internet videos, was extremely rigorous, and had a creative analytic approach. So this article, which was chosen, I know you are breathless to wait which one it is, will have a large impact within public health. And about the primary author who was chosen, the committee observed that while embedded in a senior research project, they appear to have made major contributions to conceptualization, obtaining funding, data collection, data analysis, and writing. So the award goes to the author of Understanding the Acceptability of Subdermal Implants as a Possible New HIV Prevention Method, a multi-stage mixed method study, and which has been published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research in 2020, and it is Christine Royale. And it is very much fitting, Dawn, because Christine is one of our former fellows, particularly Alex Caballo's fellow, who is now has a K Award and is now an assistant professor with us. And since Alex, and that is also a particular date today, I already had exchanged with him, Alex Caballo is formally retiring at the end of June, has been for a long time also with us, and Christine was mentored by him, and she now has a K Award and is mentored in her K and her research by Walter Bogting. So we are very pleased, Christine, that you are the awardee. And you know the tradition is for many years is that there is a certificate which Theo will hand to you, and then there is always a $300 award, which is never at the moment that we give it. And I know the awardees are always nervous whether they really get it, but you will, even in this time, you definitely will also get the $300 award. So congratulations, and we all should applaud Christine.
Thank you. This is so exciting. Thank you.
Theo, do you have the certificate?
It's being shown right now, Anka.
Great.
Yes, we see it.
We're all seeing it.
Okay.
Thank
So,
you very much.
oh, you're welcome. And I guess that's the ending of this session. So it really was a session which worked very well. A talk on trans, a journal article which won the award also on trans. So it was really very, very fitting. And thanks, Theo, since you choose very carefully the speakers, and this was a real fit. So thanks everybody.
Thanks to everybody for a great morning, and we look forward to help all of you on July 16th for Dr. David Ho's Grand Rounds presentation. And congratulations again, Christine. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.